NICIA is the Northwest Indiana Creative Investors Association. I see a lot of new faces here, so thank you for coming out. This is our Gary Goals meeting. This is a subgroup of NICIA, which simply means this is a more specific topic. And our goals topic is always Gary owners and landlords. That's what goals stands for. So this is a group focused on investors who are invested in the city of Gary. Doesn't mean that you can't be here if you don't have an investment, but if you'd like to, this is a fantastic place to be, and if you decide to join NICIA, that's just a bigger group, and most of the faces you see here tonight, you will also see at the NICIA meeting. And we meet once a month at Purdue Technology Center. We meet once a month here. Now, sometimes what we do is we're actually highlighting our members' projects. So if you have a rehab project that you are working on and you are almost finished with it, we can set that up, and instead of having a meeting here, we go to that person's project, and we kind of pick it apart, talk about it, discuss it, and just have a good time learning from each other. Okay. I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm going to turn the floor over to Corey. This is our Vice President.
All right, good evening, everyone. So we're here again, right, for our monthly meeting. Like Joe explained, Gary Goals is a specific group, and we concentrate mainly on investing in real estate in Gary. All right. So today we have the honor to have a guest speaker, which is our current mayor, Jerome Prince. So we have so just some little housekeeping rules. So we have the pre-screened questions from the previous meeting that we had last month. We didn't send out a questionnaire to ask any more questions because these questions we thought were pretty sufficient. So we have to be respectful of the mayor's time. So he's only going to be with us for a short period of time. So I'm going to let him, introduce himself. Most of you guys know who he is anyway, but then he can start off with his introduction, and we'll go through the questions that we have, and then we'll take it from there.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you all for having me this evening. I want to thank and acknowledge both of these gentlemen. I think this is a pretty sophisticated group of folks, and I'm not just saying that, for cliche, but I've introduced myself, or they actually introduced themselves to me a little bit more than a year ago, maybe, and I learned a little bit more about your group. But I think you guys are on the right track in terms of where the city can go, and certainly the future of the city. There are tremendous opportunities here, but for the most part, it takes folks like yourselves, and certainly we want to provide opportunities for local residents as well as anyone else who's interested in investing in the city. I say that because oftentimes folks believe that it's up to a city administration or any entity of government to do it all, if you will, for the lack of a better term. And for a number of reasons, that's not really a realistic expectation. And I think if that's your focus, then more than likely it's going to be met with disappointment. And so the way that I've approached government in any office that I've ever held is to be pretty forward and pretty straight, even if the answers that I share aren't what is expected or what you desire to hear. You're going to get the truth. But also what you'll get from me is someone who's extremely receptive, someone who I believe listens pretty well. I have to ask my wife about that. The point is that as your mayor, I certainly understand the aspect and the importance of service. And when Corey invited me here this evening, it was an honor to come. And so I'd like to answer any questions that you have. I'll be here for about a half an hour. But also I'd like to share what we consider our overall vision for the future of the city. Oftentimes people want to know step by step, what are the plans and what is the future of the city. And I think that's a reasonable request, and certainly a reasonable question. But to be quite frank with you, there are a lot of steps before you can get to the entire redevelopment of the city. And I mention that for a number of reasons. I was sharing with someone earlier our present financial status of the city. And I think, well, I'm certain that my history in the local assessor's office, which I started in 1994, right across the street, as a real estate deputy, and at that time had no desire to actually run for office. To be quite frank with you, I was just looking for a job, and real estate was kind of interesting, and so it was something that I became pretty proficient at, and ultimately went on to become the county assessor. But in that time, I had the perspectival advantage of seeing what was happening with our city, and the predictions that were at least shared at that particular time have come full circle. And I'll start with one important factor about our present financial status. And so last year alone in 2022, we collected a little bit more than $37 million in property taxes. Let me just back up a little bit. Most of us probably know that government is funded in three different ways. It's funded by fees that you can collect through different services. It's certainly funded by property taxes. And then there's grants and opportunities, which most often aren't sustainable. So property taxes are our main form of revenue. And as I said, last year we collected a little bit more than $37 million. But that was $49 million short of what we should be collecting with our assessed value. And the reason for that is because of tax caps. Now, as a resident here, and I'm certain that anybody who lives here or anywhere in the county who has experienced exponential increases in your property taxes certainly appreciates property tax caps. As a resident, a homeowner, and an owner of another property, another part of the city, I certainly do. But the downside of that is whatever isn't collected gets charged against city government. And so ultimately, in this instance, that resulted in $49 million less in revenue that we could potentially collect. And that's the reality of where we are. I could share, a little bit more history of how that actually started. And it was in 1998 when there was legislation to give industry a specific break. It was House Bill 1858, and the idea there was that industry, U.S. Steel, BP, and whatever the other one, ArcelorMittal, I believe it was, were looking for opportunities to realize a reduction in their taxes. And as often has been the case, U.S. Steel's position is that they simply cannot afford to continue to operate under the current tax structure, and certainly under the conditions that were caused by the influx of foreign steel. And so in some regards, city governments, I would imagine, were faced with the prospect of, do we acquiesce to this and take the risk of an industry leaving, because as we've known for a number of years, they have been the primary taxpayer, or do you fight it, right? And certainly there was a push here locally to try to avoid the anticipated occurrences that happened as a result of the shift in the tax burden. But obviously that was unsuccessful. 1858 passed, and that was the beginning of the demise of many governments. But for the city of Gary, who was already experiencing a decline in assessed values, residences, and businesses, it was sort of a double hit. And so today, we find ourselves with a little revenue and the inability in many instances to provide the type of services that citizens have come to expect, and rightfully so. I typically don't share that a whole lot because most people don't want to hear it, right? In fact, I could tell you about the shortage of revenue, and usually the response that comes afterwards is, yeah, but I still want my street fixed, and I understand that. There are a lot of people who are frustrated or have different feelings, because this has been the fate for some time. But today we find ourselves here with this amount of revenue, and many of our services have been reduced. In fact, in our general services department alone, I believe it was 2016, they went from a workforce of 150 persons to 28. And if you consider the size of the city being 57 square miles, it is literally impossible to have people perform services all over the city at the levels that we've come to expect. My perspective is you do the very best you can, much like you do with your households when your income changes and that's what we do on a daily basis. But also, I think part of our responsibility is to provide opportunity for people like yourselves who want to come in and invest, and this is the bright side of it. Just recently, and I believe on the 28th, and might have my date, actually it would be April the 4th, we'll have the final reading of a homeowner down payment assistance program. And I think that that's ideal to create the opportunities for people to become homeowners, but also it certainly could be a benefit for you as investors because it could be a tool that you could utilize to market your properties. Gary has this unique program for homeowners or new homeowners, and it's open to not only residents, but certainly the city employees, and there's a specific target for public safety employees because we want them to live here in the city of Gary. Our overall vision is to make Gary a destination city and a technology hub. From the destination city side, we want to attract 2,000 market rate residents here in the city of Gary, residents who come in and pay taxes and take care of their homes and contribute to the overall well-being of the city. I don't mean that to say that I'm against or opposed to Section 8 or subsidized housing, but we certainly don't want a proliferation of that all over our city. We want to be able to identify what areas we build in, what areas are prime for development, and what areas are going to continue to make the city more attractive for not only people to reside in, but people who want to come in and visit. And so I would say right now the largest push are in a couple different areas. One would be the Miller area as a result of the amenities that are there and certainly the existing housing stock or the fact that over the years, those homes in that area and businesses, in some instances, have been able to sustain. But the most relevant factor or thing that's going on right now is this double track project. And as a result of that, we were able to create a transportation development district, which also provides additional incentives for investors or business people who want to come in and establish a business there. We want to recreate that same opportunity in the downtown area, building on the assets that are already here. Again, the train station, certainly City Hall's downtown, but we have a metro center that is in dire need of renovation. And to that extent, we believe that those entities or those developments can help to jumpstart future development for the entire downtown area. And you couple that with the existence of a transportation development district, we believe, and it's been proven in many other areas, that those type of districts encourage development, and certainly we are looking for an opportunity to do just that. I really came to share a little bit with you, but more importantly, I want to hear what your thoughts are. I want to be able to provide answers or questions for you, if you will. Most of all, I came to make myself available and show that, or to demonstrate that I am accessible, and this is the way that I approach our job, or the job that you all have allowed me to serve for at least the last 3 years. So if there's, I don't know how you want to do it. Corey said that there's a.
We have pre-screened questions, and so I got like 3 questions. I'm gonna try to
Yes, sir.
compose it all into one.
Okay.
So just listen to what you just said. So as a group, as a real estate investment group, we can take half of that burden off of your, off of the city's chest. And what I mean by, so one of the questions were about the investors having access to the city-owned properties. So right now, I know that there are like programs that specific on the Gary website. If a homeowner would like to buy a house, I think it's a dollar program. They can buy a house, but they have to buy it, they have to fix it up, and they have to live in it, and for so many years. So those are some of the requirements for a homeowner. But as an investor, so most homeowners, they don't have the resources and the means to go through that whole process of, they can buy the house for $1, but rehabbing the houses that have been left abandoned and, you know, unoccupied for many years. It takes, I mean, this group can contest to how much work we put into these properties. So it takes people like us who have the resources, who have the funds to get in and purchase these properties. We can fix them up and then sell them to the actual people that would want to, that can get financed and get into those properties. But right now, there is no light or not easy way for us to get access to those properties. So is there something in the making, or is there something that your administration can see as far as having an easy window for the investors to get, because the city owns a lot of properties, right?
Sure.
And it's just like pulling teeth trying to get access as an investor. So we're the ones that have the cash, we're the ones that have the construction resources to get this stuff done, but if we can't get them, they just sit there. So, and that'll add to that getting those properties back on the tax roll. So is there any plans or anything that would make that process more streamlined and easier for investors?
Sure,
It's like
Corey.
4 questions all at once.
Yeah, no, that's okay, and it's a great, fair question. I've heard that, right, even prior to becoming the mayor. To answer one of your questions, does the city have a surplus of property? The immediate answer is yes, right? It's not that the city went out and acquired these properties, they got them mostly by default. People who hadn't paid their taxes, or properties have been abandoned, absentee landlords for a number of years. The majority of the properties that the city has are vacant land, right? And oftentimes there are lots that aren't buildable because they're 25 feet, but oftentimes there are, because you can go down any number of streets and see where there were 3 or 4 homes demolished in a row, and certainly that's large enough to build. And so we're actually acquiring another 1,000 properties from the Lake County, taking them off of the tax sales to make that process a little bit easier. And what I've actually asked is that there be a marketable list that's available to you all to go out and select. The ones that we have now, we initiated a couple of different programs. One was the buy one, get two, but that was largely relegated to the Etna area because that's where the largest amount of volume of properties were. Throughout the city, there are a few more, some particularly in the Emerson area, but those are actually still held up by this whole GUEA, and I don't know if you remember that debacle, but the point is we actually have to get permission from the Secretary of State in order to gain access to those and be able to market them again. That's something that we continue to work towards, and certainly would like to make those available, because at the end of the day, they're really not doing the city any good to home. Not only, I just mentioned that, you know, we have a limited capacity in terms of staff, so not only are we able to not maintain those properties, but right now they aren't collecting or generating any taxes. And so there is a list now, right, that anyone can obtain from the redevelopment department. But as I said, what you're going to find on those are mostly structures that are uninhabitable to the extent that you may or may not have interest in them. But also you'll find a lot of vacant land. I happen to think the vacant land properties are attractive also, you know, for new construction opportunities. As I said, we're trying to attract 2,000 market rate residents here in the city of Gary. And I've always had this idea or vision that one of the most creative and attractive opportunities that someone, whether you're a resident and largely residents I was thinking of, could experience would be to be able to become not only a homeowner but a landlord also. And so I'm thinking duplex or row type houses, and there are a number of lots that are available right now that the city owns through redevelopment. With this homeowners down payment assistance program, it's also applicable to the 203 loans as well, right? And so again, I think as an investor, if I were, that would certainly be something that I would be aware of, because I think it could be an excellent tool as you begin to market those and look for homeowners. Yes, sir.
All right. Another question. Well, one is, you mentioned about the 2,000 residents, the influx that you're trying to get.
Yes, sir.
Is there a timeline on that, or is that, What was that?
yesterday,
Yeah,
so.
okay.
So that's the larger vision, right? Our population decreased about 14% during the last census, but the irony of it is, within that last year, we actually saw an increase of about 1,000 residents, and so, I don't know, maybe I'm a little overly optimistic, but I think that within itself is an indication that, you know, maybe people's will, in fact, I know people will live here, right? But I think they want the same amenities that they can get in another community, and oftentimes that's a home that's, you know, certainly has the features and the amenities that you can get in other communities. I will point out one thing, Corey, and that's why I believe it's important to, in addition to trying to attract these folks, you gotta have the housing stock, right, that would be most appealing to them. There's only 11% of the homes in the city of Gary that were built before or after 1980. And so that means 89% of our homes in our housing stock, right, is pre-1980. In addition to that, there are no market rate apartment units here in the city of Gary. And so those, in my opinion, certainly are two opportunities, new construction and multifamily opportunities also for people who don't want the responsibility of home ownership. Talk to you all also, but certainly would like to live in the city of Gary.
So with that, so we know for sure that we had an influx of people, and you can ride around now and you can just look at the back of the license plate. So no offense to anyone that's from Illinois, but we see those license plates everywhere, and they're flooding over this way for multiple reasons. Number one, because the taxes are cheaper, and like you said, number two, they get more bang for their buck, you know, a nice house, backyard, basement, you know, all of them, those type of amenities.
Yeah.
But also with that, in regards to cities, another thing that as a real estate group and working in construction as investors, one struggle that we're having is permitting, licensing, things that also the city can draw income off of. So we know, like the surrounding cities and municipalities, there are certain insurances, a little bit of qualifications that you have to have in order to be, for example, a licensed general contractor.
Sure.
You have to check on the box, you gotta have, you know, all of those things, but I think it's Gary and it's one more city in this region or in Indiana that has a test that is extremely difficult for an educated contractor to pass. You know, obviously some people can pass it because we have licensed contractors, but I won't say I have, but I know some people out here who have, that have unlicensed contractors that are just as good, if not better, than the licensed contractor, who fly under the radar to do the work because they can't pass the test. They're licensed in Hammond, Maryville, East Chicago, all the surrounding cities, but all the contractors say the same thing. It's so hard to get their license here in Gary. So they either A, they want to do business in Gary, or B, they fly under the radar. And that's an opportunity missed to collect money from getting the permits, doing the inspections, and things like that. Now you can see, even just on social media, how many projects are going in the city, how many projects are in process in the city of Gary. And I can guarantee you 50% of them aren't following the right process as far as, you know, and that's because of the challenges. So is there any, I know that that's not like a mayoral responsibility, but that's a department responsibility. So is there anything that's you heard of that's in the making as far as making that process more streamlined, like the surrounding municipalities getting access to the city?
So I'll start with the latter part of that. I actually disagree. I think it is a mayoral responsibility. In fact, you know, every aspect of the city ultimately, right? Although you rely on your department heads and certainly leaders like that to execute and look for opportunities and bring me ideas. Capacity is an issue, but again, I'm not going to point specifically to that. But yeah, I've heard oftentimes also that the test is a bear, right? And that's just putting it mildly. I've never taken it, but obviously you've seen it, or at least are aware of it. And those are discussions that I haven't had. But what we are doing to try to make the permitting process a little easier, and we've initiated that during this administration is the open gov system, right? Where you actually can apply online versus coming into the office, right? And some folks who are technically challenged, certainly there's a couple portals there and someone there available to assist you in the event that you aren't familiar with the online process. But yeah, to your point, we certainly want to realize an opportunity to collect as many fees. As I mentioned, that's one of the three ways that the city can generate money. But you know, I have to go back and this may one second, Joe. May sound like you know, an excuse or a cop out, but it's the reality. The city, as a result of tax caps, has really been gutted from a capacity perspective. And I believe the building department right now probably has 6 employees in there, and certainly with the volume of interest that's here, in my opinion, it's not enough. And so one of the things that we need to do, and certainly will begin to work on during the next budget cycle, is an opportunity to rework the budget and try to find an opportunity to build capacity in the areas that are going to generate revenue. As far as the test goes, I haven't had a chance to look into it. I maybe had a chance, but I just simply haven't. But as I continue to hear that, it's certainly a concern. And if we can do anything, I mean, you want qualified people, obviously. So I believe there should be some sort of qualifying mechanism. But if the test is that stringent, and I believe the easiest way we could do it is just take the test or whatever requirements from another community and compare it to what we're utilizing and maybe find a pathway to do it. I couldn't do that unilaterally, right? But if I did the homework and the research and have the evidence there, I'm certainly that I could lobby, you know, the city council and the folks who would help to pass such a policy change as that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, they have that open book test now.
Open book?
Yeah,
Mhm.
you take the test, and you can get answers.
Yeah, okay. I think it's always been open, but you
Well,
gotta
it was
know where to
that-
go in the book to get the answer, right? You know?
Or-
Yeah,
Well, it
sure.
took me, I had to read it like 3-4 times over,
Okay,
kind of remember it way.
good, but you got it.
Yeah.
Right on, good job. Yep. So you got other questions, Corey?
Yeah, I,
Yes, Joe.
the values increased, so like when after the pandemic, the materials went up, and housing values went up, and absolutely the rentals went up. The value of the rentals went up, the increase in the rents went up, which was all great things. Because now, it was actually easier to get funding.
Mhm.
But, you know, we've been redlined, and it's hard to get funding, because a lot of the banks wouldn't touch anything under 50,000.
Okay.
So about a year ago, those numbers started coming up. The values of the houses are starting to now appraise more. A lot of us were able to take advantage of that. But now again, since like over the last year, that minimum cap, at least with the lenders that I use, first was 50, then it went up to 75. Now it's back up over 100,000. Are you, or is there any plans, or are you guys trying to work with any banks or lenders that could say, hey, we'll work with you guys, because I mean, we have quality work, quality products. It's just that funding sometimes is definitely a hindrance when you have so many houses available.
Sure, the short answer is yes. In fact, this down payment homeowners assistance program was actually a result of a conversation that we had with another real estate group, right, who actually brought a lender to the table with them. And so I'm certain that they're gonna be prepared to take advantage of it also. And I don't know specifically what type of creative financing that he's doing, but he's certainly a reputable lender. And so there are at least some opportunities, right? I believe that our local banks, Horizon certainly has shown an interest to get involved here recently. And in fact, we have a meeting scheduled with them next month to talk about some other creative opportunities that they could come up with. But that's the extent of that.
And to see the rental income is there.
Okay.
You know, some of us follow kind of the 1% rule, so that whatever you invest or spend to complete a property, you can rent that out for 1%.
Sure.
Right? So our latest house that we rented out was over $1,300. Well, that
What
clearly,
part of the city?
East Glen Park.
Okay,
You
good.
know? So that clearly says that based on that, if you work that number backwards, we should be able to have a valuation over $100,000. But in that area, no, we don't. 85, you know, maybe 90 in that pocket where we're at. couple sprinklings, here and there, of over $100,000. But that, just because of that additional problem, one block to one block, it's different.
Sure.
So we have the income to pay back a loan of that amount. It's just we can't get the appraisals and the banks to work necessarily with those numbers.
Yeah, I think a large part of the problem is definitely in the appraisals, right? Because if the sales are there, right, and the values, right, and predict the sales are gonna certainly dictate, the overall values of the entire area, as you are aware.
All right, so like we stated at the beginning of the meeting,
It kind of puts a smile on my face because I can see a lot of the work that the investors are doing to rehab these houses, and the quality of the work that they're doing is great too. So, that being said, we can go around and we can see all these changes in the homes, but I look at the infrastructure, the roads, the streets around, there's not much to it. You don't want to have to drive out of your driveway and mess up your alignment, but I think there's a lot of work that can be done in that aspect. And that would help with bringing people to the city too. They want to see,
Sorry to come so close,
That's okay. I was gonna give you a second slap.
Chrissy, your point's well taken, and that's sort of why I hit on just a little bit, right? The financial challenge at the city. I mean, the reality is Gary is the largest city in Northwest Indiana. It's 57 square miles, and the closest city that comes to that is Hammond at 25. And when you consider the amount of roads or the volume of roads that are here, it's a lot. We have 400 miles of streets, and unfortunately, many of them have gone unkept for a number of years. And so I wish I could, wave a magic wand or just make it happen overnight. But I can tell you, over the last 3 years since we've been in office, we've certainly spent about $10 million in paving over the last 3 years, which is the equivalent of about 17 miles of road. I mean, although there's a lot more to do, the point is that there is a plan to continually and consistently do paving, but we need money. We need an influx of resources. We need assessed value. We need investors, obviously, and then gradually that will begin to occur. Another impediment, right, for investment or people wanting to live here are the abandoned structures that's here. I mean, I hear it every day. Sometimes you can go down a block and see a number of them, or an entire block, or an entire neighborhood. And to be specific, there are about 6,700 abandoned structures in the city. I asked the director of redevelopment to run a number for the amount or what it would take to demolish the properties along just the 4th and 5th Avenue corridor in anticipation, right, of creating this TDD and the double track and the metro station. So I believe the number was there are about 350 of those structures, but the amount to demolish them is somewhere in the area between $12 and $15 million. And I mention that to say is that that's just one area of the city, and so it's pretty expensive. But through various mechanisms, whether it be state or federal assistance, we continue to seek additional opportunities in order to get funding to do just that. Presently, we're hoping to complete a development project, or that it comes to fruition, because to that is $10 million that's tied to it. Those numbers that I gathered were for the state legislature, who's actually considering some legislation now to provide money or some resources to go to the metro station, which is anticipated to be about $100 million, but to perform that demolition along the corridor, because in my opinion, that is certainly where our priority is, for no other reason to provide additional opportunities for your investors to purchase this land and to take advantage of it.
And for the record, I've seen some wonderful changes to the city.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely, absolutely,
Ladies,
absolutely.
Some other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So I've talked with some people in the redevelopment council before, and they mentioned a lot about outside money trying to come in and always wanting tax credits and kind of raking the city across the coals as far as the tax
Yeah.
code and everything like that. And that's always cost prohibitive to the city, because you guys can't do the infrastructure and everything like that. But what if, is there a mechanism where a local capital group that could be dedicated to the redevelopment of the city and coming up with some sort of not necessarily a tax agreement that handcuffs the city, but actually helps drive that tax revenue? How would that capital group connect with the city and then establish that relationship?
So it just starts with a discussion. As I mentioned, I'm largely open and receptive. I'm not opposed to tax abatements, but that certainly shouldn't be our first card that we play.
Correct.
In fact, the latest two developments, the one on the far west side and there's one in the Miller section of the area, are going to be developments that are done without tax abatement as a result of us standing firm. But it would certainly start with a discussion, but I think the litmus test for tax abatement or tax incentives would be what is the benefit provided to the city. And so if there's jobs or this massive development that one day will pay taxes in a short, relatively short period of time, then that's certainly something that would be or should be considered. Earlier I mentioned the tax structure change and the shift of burden from industry to residential. That within itself, certainly was a huge blow to the city. But if you couple that with the fact that right prior to me taking office, U.S. Steel, and I'm not trying to villainize them. I mean, that's what people, in business do, is look for opportunities to reduce, their expenses or burden. They received another tax reduction for, I believe it's the next period of next 25 years, where they pay half of the investment that they just made. So ultimately, city received a certain dollar amount, and to be fair, I mean, they needed it. They were facing a $14 million deficit at that time. And so when I say, or when I mentioned earlier that, oftentimes industries or larger companies like that sort of know that they have the city or a municipality, and in this case Gary, in an awkward position, I think ultimately the best or the greatest consideration should be what is the greatest benefit. And in my opinion, that certainly wasn't $1 million, right, or whatever, was received for a 50% tax reduction over the next 20 years, because those are dollars that won't go to the taxes or fix the roads that she's speaking about. And it's just, a consequence of something that we have to deal with now.
Gotcha. I don't know if my question was entirely clear. I use
Okay.
I use the tax question as to help recognize that there is a problem, but it's more of like, I know that, and I've talked with a lot of people here. There is a capital group, myself and a couple of other people that are local, that want to put money and do new development in the city. How do we get in touch with the right people, other than obviously talking right in front of you, sir? To make those funds available to that new development, aside from just the investors.
So when you say make the funds available, you make the funds available for?
So we would like to get in touch with and work with the city so that we can come up with larger new development programs. We're all military veterans, and I'm personally from here. I live about 5 blocks from here.
Okay.
And we all have a severe interest in this city, but trying to get in touch with the right people has always kind of seemed to be
A little challenging.
a little challenging.
Sure. And so that's largely why I am as involved as I am, because if that happens, then obviously I need to know about it, right, so that we can address it. But we have a Department of Redevelopment, have a Department of Economic Development and Community Development, and one of those folks would be the first ones to start with. In this instance, I would certainly love to connect you with the Director of Redevelopment, right, and
Okay.
begin the conversation. And if your capital stack is ready, you guys are ready to go, I'm certain that they would be receptive to it, or should be, right?
Okay.
And I certainly would want to hear if it was anything otherwise.
Okay.
Please.
Cool.
Thank you. Hey, John. Good. How about you?
My voice goes.
Sorry. The Calumet Township Assessor here, so I want to take some of the heat off me and put it. He's the one making taxes go up. No, I'm just kidding. He's the new assessor, Cozy Weatherspoon. He was a former council person, and thank you for coming out, Cozy. Yep. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How you doing, man?
Victoria, good. How about you?
I'm good. Good to see you again.
You too.
It was kind of well, first I want to tell you that I think that you have done a great job given the consideration of the circumstances that you've had to deal with in the city of Gary.
Absolutely.
And I believe that a mayor can only be as effective as the people that are around him, that are willing to work with the mayor, whoever the mayor is. So to answer the lady's question that she had even about the people that did the city, I live here. I've lived about 5 blocks from here. I also invest here. I am also a contractor here. And I've seen the people come in my area fixing the road, the potholes that are in the street. And because I do what I do and I know what I know, I went to the truck that I saw them taking the asphalt stuff off, I noticed the process of what they were doing was wrong. And I asked the gentleman, I said, hey, you're not doing that right, blah, blah, blah. I said, why are you doing like that? His first answer to me was job security.
It's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt if that happens, and certainly not going to excuse it. I think, in that person's mind, whoever said that to you has probably been with the city for a while, right? They're used to working at the pace that they do. They feel they're overworked and underpaid, and because of that, I'm going to slow down, and that's unfortunate. That's a management issue.
Sure.
And certainly, we've experienced that in a few instances and had an opportunity to deal with it, but it largely is something that needs to be addressed as we continue to move forward. I'm 100% accountable for what I do, and I think that if I am, and I am, that everybody who works for the city needs to be. Getting to that level is a little challenging also for some of the reasons that you mentioned, but that's not the answer that you want to hear, certainly not one that I want to hear in a public forum anyway. Yeah, thank you.
The decrease of people that you have working in the city. So I'm gonna speak on behalf of this group. There are certain areas that you need some volunteers to do things, because we actually, as investors, we actually do care about the city and what we put into the city. I mean, we have a vested interest in the city. I mean, most of us, some of us live in the city, some of us don't live in the city, but we still invested. So we have vested interest. So we're not just here to say, hey, we want to see you do this, or do you have the answer for this? We're willing to step in places, in spots and positions where we can kind of help out, aid and assist those people that are in these positions, that have been there for a long period of time, who's comfortable, they only know the process that they've been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, this group, we have innovative people, not just this group, but people, investors. We work for larger companies, we've seen different processes, we know different systems, so if you need some volunteers at any point,
I
feel free
wasn't
to reach out.
ignoring you. I was making a note of that.
I got
right?
And it's being recorded, so y'all hear me. It's being recorded. We have volunteers, and we got people that's willing to volunteer.
Listen, I mean, if I don't recognize anything, I recognize that I certainly can't do it, and I never thought I could. I never, when I even campaigned 4 years ago, said that I was going to change the fabric of the city overnight. But one thing that I certainly recognize that all of you all do is that collaboration works a lot better.
Absolutely.
Go a lot further.
Absolutely.
To that end, we established a program a couple of years ago called All In, right? And that's exactly what that's about. It's every city worker, every employee, every elected official, as well as residents, businesses, companies, and entities that want to assist. And last year, and we run it typically started in the spring all the way into the beginning of the fall, and it involves cleanup efforts for the most part and other initiatives. But last year we got up to 1,000 volunteers, and so gonna call you. We appreciate you coming in, or at least sharing that with us also. Yep. Any other questions? I do have to go. Sorry.
Last summer, lady in 17th and McKinley moved over from Illinois into
Yep.
a rental that I
I
managed.
remember her. Yep.
She
Tell everybody though.
so she moves in and she's excited about her place. We did some work. She wanted to open it up some more. There was some overgrown lots next to it, and she goes, "I'm going to email the mayor about this. Something needs to be done." I was like, "Okay, well, Gary, we've got a little work to do here and there." But 3 days later, the tractor showed up, wiped out those 3 lots. And on the 4th day, there was a distinguished gentleman about his height standing on our front porch there visiting and following up on the matter. So it was a cool thing to see. Made a good impression.
Well, and that's obviously the goal, right? Is to make a good impression. But no, I take what I do very seriously. And
Absolutely.
so she did contact me by email, and I just wanted to see it for myself, which is how I actually got over there. And she was right, it was a forest next to her. In some instances, we're able to address it, but to be clear, we don't have a service on demand. But in that instance, it was a nice block, right? And it was, the housing stock was pretty substantial, and certainly was in the condition that to clear those lots that were next to her. Oh, and I believe we owned them, the city, right? So you couple all of that together, it made a tremendous improvement for an entire area.
Wow.
Versus just one person. And so in those instances, yeah, we'll definitely address it. But thank you
Well,
for
the
the
rest of that block was
recognition.
very happy. Yeah, you saw those gorgeous houses on one end. The other end
Absolutely.
was that.
Yep.
Everybody was happy in that block.
Yep.
One question.
Yes, sir.
So, obviously, man, since you've been in office, you've had a chance to get your bearings, right?
A little
So,
bit.
yeah, I mean, you've had a vision about what it is that you want to do for the city and what it is that you want to accomplish. Given that you've had that time now, what do you see as the main corridor for success in rebuilding the city now, knowing what you know?
I would say, well, when you say corridor, you mean the area you're talking about?
No, I mean the city as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you see? You've been like 3 years now,
Mhm.
right? So, what are you looking at in terms of the biggest problematic area that you'd like to focus on, and what do you see as it being as a real huge success to the city when that's accomplished?
Yeah, I would have to go right back to the basics. I mean, without question, we have to continue to place a lot of emphasis, resources, time, energy into cleaning the city up, right? And I know that sounds basic, but you can go
Yes.
just about anywhere in the city and see dumping, and it's unfortunate. So more importantly, we need to figure out how to stop people from dumping, right? Because I can send my folks out to an area, they can clean it up, and before they're in their trucks and leaving, right, someone's dumped over there again. And we can't continue to
Disrespect.
expend resources on things like that. We are aggressively pursuing people who at least are paying their taxes, because at the very minimum, it shows that they have some interest in the property. And we've established a lien mechanism where if we do have to come out and clean it up, right, and it's somebody else's, yours, or someone else, we can attach whatever expenses associated with that to the tax bill now, and certainly that should prove.
You mean like absentee owners, like that will actually own
You
properties?
can call them just absentee or what, just
Oh, whoever.
neglectful.
Gotcha.
Yeah, irresponsible
There we
people
go.
who own properties but just holding on to it, right?
Right.
Paying the taxes is an indicator for me, and so there's a lot of property like that, but in a lot of instances, they aren't paying the taxes. They're still holding on to it, waiting for a payday. There's one just west of here, right next to City Hall. And I looked it up the other day. That guy owes about $45,000 in taxes, But, you know, what he does is he's a serial bankruptcy filer, and that protects him in that instance. We're continuing to try to pursue it. There's an unsafe building petition on him now, right, in order to address that. But the point is I think that by far is probably the biggest impediment, right, to the type of development in some instances, or certainly the perception that people who live here and who visit here have of the city. They think we don't care, and that's simply not the
Absolutely.
case. In terms of opportunity, I would have to say the TDD certainly would be the greatest opportunity at this particular time, and just capitalizing on the assets that we do have, and again, attracting more people to come into the city.
All right, we'll take one more question.
Yeah, and then one more. And then
One more, and that's it. And then after this last question, you guys.
And then I'll come back again, like after election or something like that.
You got jokes.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
you know I love you. I just have two questions. I need for you to refer who I go to. Number one, you talked about 3 ways that the city needs to incorporate and get money.
Yes, ma'am.
Grants, fees, and taxes.
Yes, ma'am.
Fees we can control. Fees, like I talked to you before about cameras, and you said it's against the law? Or is it, why can we
Well,
not
I
get,
think you were talking about speed cameras.
I'm
And-
talking
and in the
about
state of Indiana, that is.
I'm
Yeah.
talking about the cameras right on our main thoroughfare, 25th Avenue,
To do what though, Doc?
to collect people who are going by and.
Speeding?
No, speeding, turning when it says no right turn. You know, those type of things. Those are fees that you can get right off, just send them a letter in the mail like they do in Chicago.
So from a speeding perspective, it is against Indiana law, right?
But we
And-
have
yeah.
representatives that are that go downstate, that can change that.
Sure.
They can change that. That's why we pay them to go to Indianapolis to change
Point well
and
taken.
make laws that help us.
Yes, ma'am.
That's one. Number two, I've never seen a city with so many truck dumps and car dumps with Illinois plates on them. You saying where? Let's take behind Ajax, Ajax on 35th in Massachusetts, go behind.
Massachusetts, right.
Okay, or go to 36th.
Just south of it, or
Oh,
north,
going
south
west,
of
going west behind Ajax. Why are all these cars and trucks there? On Massachusetts,
it.
on
36th
36th
Avenue.
in Massachusetts, you know where it
Gotcha,
is.
yeah,
Why are those cars there and they have Illinois license plates?
yep.
Why is on 11th Avenue, that man still there in Anderson Baseball, where it used to be Anderson Baseball that plate?
Durham hair product.
Right,
and all
and
that.
Durham,
So
why-
let me
why- we need to
address
help
him.
us.
We're actually, so, and you know the history, and you've been around long enough, that's been an issue for at least the last 10 years and probably more, but I believe we're finally getting closer to him, right? And actually shutting him down through our interactions with IDEM. The other ones, you know, both of those received permits to establish what they call an auto yard, right? And the one on 36 in Massachusetts, I believe is actually illegal, right? And so, I don't have a specific answer for you today as to why we can't go out there and just shut them down. But that guy was given a permit to operate before we even got it. I've been out there a couple times because he actually used to park on the sidewalk, which it looks like he's doing it again, but not to the level that he was. Same thing on King Drive, just north of Ridge Road. The guy, but I don't know if you noticed there, his cars are starting to be towed away because he was parking on that sidewalk for years. And so I think what happens in those instances, Doc, is that people just kind of do what they want to do
Get
because
comfortable.
they've been able to get away with
Years.
it. And, you know,
But these are revenue
Generators.
Generators.
Sure.
That we can use. I mean, not $5, not $10.
Mhm.
These are hundreds of thousands.
You know, perhaps it takes more people getting interested in making their point well known, right? That this is unacceptable, that you're not gonna accept it and make an issue out of it. And I'm certain that, you know, I'll listen, and I'm certain that others who have the authority to make those type of changes, right, would do whatever we need to do also. I could point to capacity, and that's certainly a factor, because unfortunately, the conditions that you just mentioned, I could name probably a dozen of them that exist, and some of them historically so, like the dump that's next to the general services yard off of, what's that, Harrison Street, and just north of 11th Avenue. You know, it's been there for years, and so, and I'm not making light of it, I just want to let you know that I do acknowledge it, and certainly something that I would like to work on as well.
Okay, who are the people that you talk to about that?
Well, it starts with code enforcement, for sure. There needs to be a citation. I would imagine that there's been hundreds of citations. Where it goes from there, right, I have no idea. It typically goes to the court, and I'm not going to point at or blame any particular person. I can tell you, recognize to the degree that it was an issue that when we first got in office, one of the things I wanted to do is bring that process in-house and make it an administrative process. It would cut out some of the wrangle and the middleman that I have to go through. And that was opposed, right? It was opposed by the city council. He remembers it. You know, and listen, this isn't to point to anybody. I think people have various reasons why they do what they do, but the point is I don't have the authority to unilaterally address it, but as long as I don't forget about it and continue to make it a point, then perhaps, and then certainly have the backing of all of you, or anyone who's just as concerned, maybe, you know, they'll listen to that. But yeah, that was one of the first actions we took, because we realized that it would be a streamlined process and a heck of a lot easier than having to go through all of those different steps and be forced to give you an answer like I'm giving this evening. I don't know where to downplay or where the impediment exists. All I know, and it's very obvious, that there is one, and it's one that we continue to need to address, because until we clean up, right, and we're gonna have that.
Absolutely.
I've taken a slightly different approach with it in addressing the properties that we own, right? Because I think we have to be responsible in order to set the example. And so one of the first structures that we got demolished, probably within the first 6 months of being in office, was the building on 11th in, Massachusetts, the old MetroCorp building that sat there defunct. And so that entire area is cleaned up now, right? From 11th to 12th. I can tell you now the NICIA building's coming down soon, right? Because it's been there forever. The price tag to demolish it was a little bit more than $1 million, but we were able to collaborate with the county council persons, and just received a grant from them in order to match what we're gonna put with it in order to get that one down. And so there are a number of issues, as you pointed out, and you know, forums like this make it known that there are residents like yourself who care about it, and as long as you continue to beat the drum, I'm certain that people like myself would listen a little bit more.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. You had another one? Very nice.
All right, guys. So once the mayor leaves, we all are welcome to kind of still hang out and network and